Welcome to HCD's MindSet. I'm Michelle Nigella.
And I'm Kathryn Ambrose.
We are on a mission to help you identify what consumer science innovations have a lot of untapped value or are too good to be true.
So join us for more curious conversations as we try to make sense of the complex but fascinating world of human behavior.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to MindSet. It is your favorite host, Kathryn.
Oh, wait, am I not the favorite host?
I said our favorite host.
Okay, host.
Or your favorite
plural.
host.
Okay. Yes,
Well,
your favorite hosts, the two of us. Hi, everybody.
So it's Kathryn and Michelle. We butchered that intro. We're just going to keep going. But we're really excited today to be joined by two incredible researchers that I'm going to let introduce themselves. But we have on right now Jonas and Valentina, and they are just, like I said, incredible researchers who we're going to learn a little bit about some of their recent research that Michelle actually worked alongside them with. But before we hop into that, I just want to welcome you both to the show. And how are you guys doing today?
Thank you. Well, we're very excited to be with our favorite hosts. Here it is, of course. And it's a big pleasure to be here.
I'm also happy to be here, and it's a great opportunity. I think it's going to be fun.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So I've actually known Valentina for some time. And, so we're both Monellians. Actually, I guess all three of us are Monellians. I'm sorry, Kathryn. So Monellians, though, from back in the day of postdoc days. And so Valentina, maybe you can tell us, we'll start with you and then we'll go to you, Jonas, if that's okay. And of course, Jonas, we would love to hear any little tidbits that you would like to add to her story. Feel free to chime in and vice versa as well, Valentina, if you love adding stuff to his. But Valentina, just to start with you, I met you in Philadelphia at Monell Chemical Senses Center when we were both postdocs. But how did you become you? What are you, I guess, first of all? Tell us who you are.
This existential question,
I know.
But so what am I? I'm a trained psychologist that works on the chemical senses in particular, so smell and taste. And I'm interested in understanding how people smell and taste, from babies to really the elderly, and trying to use how people smell to improve their health and their well-being, generally speaking. So I'm really interested, and my lab is focused on studying the connection between smell and taste and health.
And so why psychology?
Why psychology? Serendipity is the response to that. So I was an undergraduate and I was very interested in the brain, and I wanted to understand why people did what they did. And I joined a motor lab of all places. And in this motor lab, so I was studying like how people act and behave. And my advisor at the time was interested in looking at how the different senses will prime actions. And the topic of my undergraduate thesis was, can smell prime actions? And then once I studied more of that, I fell in love with smell. I ditched motor behavior, and here we are several years later, really studying the sense of smell and taste. And that was what brought me to the Monell Center, where I met Michelle, and I did my postdoc there, studying like human olfaction and how the brain reacts to odor. And then I went on and studied more about how people detect odors and also use odors to reflect like their olfactory abilities, basically. So currently we're working on several different projects, particularly the development of smell tests, because I really have a dream of having everybody like taking a smell test during their lifetime. So we're working on it.
That's really interesting. Yeah, go ahead, Kathryn.
One thing I was curious about, for people that might not be as familiar with the world of taste and smell, what do you actually mean by a smell test? Because people may not know what that actually is.
That is a very good question. And actually, the majority of people have never taken one. So everybody, Michelle has glasses, Jonas has glasses, I have glasses, and we've all gotten a vision test at one point or the other in our lifetime. Even babies get hearing tests. But for a smell test, it's kind of more difficult. And we just ran some, polls at Monell recently, and we saw that 75% of people actually have no idea. They've never taken a smell test. So what we are developing, it's a test that is quite rapid, and easy. And we ask people to peel off a label that has imbued in a glue, in an odorless glue, some odors. And we ask people several questions, like, can you smell any odor here? And so tell me where you smell any odor. How intense is the odor? Can you identify the odor? I'll give you 4 options, and I want you to tell me what the odor smells like. And then we ask people whether they like the odor. We're very good at saying what we like and what we don't like when it comes to smell and taste. So we're less good at saying what they are. So we have fuzzy representations, but with some help of, options that we see in front of us, we can actually provide accurate responses. And so by just asking 4 simple questions, we have ways of measuring whether people's abilities in the sense of smell are normal. And so they can actually, we can actually smell a range of odors that are quite intense, or whether we have smell loss, which can be partial or complete, or whether we have distortions and we have parosmia, for instance. But everything, all of these questions have no meaning if we actually don't look at whether people have any awareness of what their senses of smell and taste are doing. And this is actually the work that we have done with Jonas and with Michelle and others, because we really think that people do not value the senses as much as we think they are important. And, we may be a special crowd here, but that's
very true. Yeah.
that we want everybody to at least think about, right?
Yeah.
And do you care about your smell and taste?
Yeah, I mean, it's talked about, a lot, I think, when you're in the act of using it, right? So when people are cooking, or, maybe when they're shopping or something like that. But in general, like for health, I don't think people really think about it as an everyday survival sort of thing. Now, what's also interesting about your lab, given the modern times and the modern world we live in, where are you located right now? Because now, while Monell is located in Philadelphia, where are you located?
So right now, in this very moment, I'm in Paris, France. And so sometimes I work remotely, sometimes I'm at Monell. Let's say that COVID brought for us this global footprint of sensory research. And so I'm embodying that, the abilities.
I think that's actually really interesting, especially given the collaboration that we did on the study, is that it very much was, global and working from home. So I think that those are some really, interesting ideas to sort of bring into this conversation. But then also, Jonas, where are you located?
So I am in Philadelphia.
Okay. So now you work in Valentina's lab, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So tell us a little bit about you and who you are, what you're doing, and why. Why are you you? What's your origin story?
Okay, so I actually have a background as a food scientist, and then I did a PhD in sensory and psychophysics, especially of taste interactions. I did that at Aarhus University in Denmark before transferring here to Monell.
Why food science then?
So I have a soft spot for specialty coffee, and that's actually what brought me in the first place. So I was actually originally, before I came into food science, I was doing a bachelor's degree in history. And while doing that, I started a side hustle where I founded a coffee roastery.
Oh my goodness.
Then after this roastery kind of took off, I realized I didn't know anything about coffee or taste or the processes of roasting. So I figured maybe I should transfer or change field into food science. Then So I did that. I still doing my my side hustle at the roastery. I also I then started at a bachelor's in food science instead. During a development project with a consultancy company who did sensory science, I had a long conversation with one of the sensory scientists about taste in coffee and especially about sourness in coffee, because sourness in coffee doesn't really correlate with the pH of the coffee. And I found this disconnect with what you actually think taste is and how it's perceived very fascinating. And basically, I haven't stopped thinking about sourness since.
Oh, really? Okay.
It's
So
so interesting that what you've shared too about coffee specifically, because I am the least experienced in the space out of everybody here, but
She doesn't drink coffee.
I don't drink coffee
Either.
Oh, you
Oh,
do?
good. Okay, I have a buddy here.
You do.
But the thing that I find fascinating, especially, is coffee is often used as almost like a cleanser whenever you are smelling different fragrances. I've often seen coffee beans used basically as a palate cleanser for your nose. And so I do think that also, as consumers are in the world and maybe they're trying perfumes or different types of candles, they don't even realize what kind of ingredients or what kind of things that are out there that you could use to almost get better at understanding all the smells that are around us that are helping us or informing us in in our space. And so I do think that would be a really interesting spot to see, because I know, how did you end up now with Valentina, Jonas, looking into the idea of just consumer perceptions and really seeing if people even had thoughts about smell at all?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I'm so basically doing my PhD. I actually made a trade-off with my supervisor where if I would look at sweetness as well, we could do some sourness. That process of I'm kind of figuring out. So at a food science department, you of course you look at the food, but I was throughout my PhD, I increasingly became aware or interested about the person actually perceiving the food more than the food itself. And I think that's what brought me to Monell and to Valentina, that actually to a larger degree wanted to know a little bit more about how are the perception of the coffee actually formed, what makes you perceive the coffee as you do, and why might that be different from me or Valentina.
And when did you join Monell?
So I joined last year in September. So I'm
okay. So pretty new to Monell then.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So and luckily, like, it's on the way coming out of the pandemic. Have you been to La Colombe?
What?
Have you been to La Colombe, a coffee shop
Philly.
in Philadelphia?
No, I don't know that one.
I'll have to share it to you. Have you been, Valentina?
I've been many times, Jonas. I didn't realize I did. Okay. Right. We have a day.
Yes.
Jonas is always very kind. Like, he thinks for the lab and shares, like, he wants to share the passion for coffee. And he's like really fueling our research in many ways. In many ways, caffeine included.
So speaking of fueling the research, what is outside of so we obviously did the smell perception, or rather senses perception and value study, and that's very recent. But since you joined, what has been your focus in your lab? Has it been predominantly around studies like that, or I know there's other stuff that you've been working on too? So what would you say is some of the stuff that you guys have been working on together?
So we've been primarily really working on different studies, focusing on the development and validation of a smell test, which is called the SCENTinel, and it's a rapid smell test. And again, the idea of linking this to awareness of smell and taste loss is because people do not feel that it's necessary to have a tool to measure olfaction. And so our core research at the moment has really been focused on that. We're also interested as a lab to really validate very broadly what smell and taste means for people and what are the consequences of having a certain loss or certain phenotypes, like certain specific ways of perceiving smell and tastes. And we do that at the global level. So this started with the pandemic, where I helped to coalesce a large group of people, like we are 700 and counting at the moment, all over the world across the 6 continents. And the goal there was to really get together and understand how smell and taste were impacted by COVID-19. But once that network got created, we're actually able to answer several different questions that really are putting like smell and taste measures in the global world. So we do know that coffee doesn't smell like pleasantly coffee in all the different countries. That people in Japan love to eat fermented fish in the morning. I'm not sure if any of us would have as much enjoyment for that as the first breakfast item, but as we know, this is cultural and depends on how we've been exposed. And so Jonas and I are part of another project with this large consortium from the Global Consortium for Chemosensory Research, studying sweet taste and how sweet preferences affect the how the regional differences in sweet preferences affect like the way in the lab we measure sweet preference taste. And so if we think that we're replicating the same study in 20 countries, we may find different results, not because we did something wrong methodologically, but because the context really imposed a different interpretation of that study. And so one of the interests of the lab is really understanding how we can create tools that many in the world can use so that whatever study we're conducting in sensory science reflecting smell and taste can actually be compared with all of the other data that we have out there. And I think right now the literature is very much skewed towards a lot of Western and, you know, democratic countries, and that's not all there is. Simply.
Yeah, that is really important. And it's something that we actually see in consumer research a lot as well. You know, so you're talking very academically and thinking about humans in general, but when it comes to consumer products that have like a smell or a taste, what's really interesting is with globalization, of course, it'd be much cheaper if we could just have one flavor and have, you know, decide that, oh, like it's going to be, you know, this one flavor or this one fragrance that we're going to put in our top selling product. But of course, you know, what really ends up happening is that you sort of innovate for the mediocre, right? If you try to get something that's going to be liked by everybody, it's liked by no one. And there really are these global differences, but even in descriptions, right? So, you know, how you word different things, how do you meet that sort of challenge when you think about smell perception? And because you were saying you even ask liking or even familiarity with some of the smells that you might have in your smell test. Do you find that you have to adjust a lot of those things when you're asking in other countries?
Yes. And this is actually one of the challenges of the validation of our smell tests, because we, for instance, so we tried it in the US. We have thousands of people who took it in the US, and we have a sample of 300 people, give or take, in Nigeria. Of course, coconut, it's not going to be perceived the same way in the US and in Nigeria. So the coconut, it's a little bit of a mixture in the smell that we're using. It's a little bit of artificial, and it's clearly not recognized by the Nigerian people as well as it is recognized by the US people that have more of that idea of coconut as that artificial type of smell. And so one of our efforts with SCENTinel is really trying to translate it and validate it in several different languages to see whether all of the versions of the test that we have can actually be used equally in all the different countries. And if not, what are the versions that are resistant to cultural changes? Because those are the candidate odors that actually are going to help us monitor the world or the population at large, irrespective of cultural differences. If we think about it, the US is a very multicultural society. So having a test that is resistant to these cultural differences and linguistic differences is actually very helpful, even nationally.
But even in the US, the trend, I mean, thinking about, you were talking about rating intensity, right? And the trend in the US would be to have much less intense fragrances, whereas, for example, in Brazil, they would prefer the strength to be stronger, right? So if you're tracking intensity and you're thinking about this in terms of tracking even health, or, like you were saying, checking your eyesight, checking your olfaction, is there a set sort of threshold that you have, or do you really have to consider adjusting that by culture?
So we may want to adjust the algorithm based on which we consider people's responses. Currently, we haven't found in the several countries that we have tested a problem in that respect, because the odor of the SCENTinel tests are very intense. So on a scale from 0 to 10, these are 8 reliably. 5,000 people kind of rated them on average on an 8. So we're pretty confident that the majority of people can smell it. Then when we ask anosmic or hyposmic, so people that have completely lost their sense of smell or just partially lost it, what we see is that a good cutoff, at least for the initial data that we have, is 20. So people that rate the intensity of the odor less than 2 or 20, depending on the scale that we're using, those are really the people that cannot smell that odor. But the vast majority of people would rate it as a 4 or above.
Okay.
And so we're really trying to make our cutoffs as conservative in this way. But I would be very intrigued to test this in Brazil, because we haven't done it. So maybe we will find different results there.
Yeah, no, that'd be interesting. Now, also thinking about how this is related to health, right? And the need to potentially be checking your olfaction. What are some of the health related things that people should think of as a good reason to track their olfaction abilities?
So let's start from the easiest case. Let's imagine that somebody was born without a sense of smell. These people are called congenital anosmics, and they generally don't figure this out until they're 10 or older on average.
Wow.
So, and usually it happens because something weird happens. Like I was talking with a congenital anosmic the other day, and she told me, look, I figured it out when I was, give or take, 11 years old. I went to a water waste plant and everybody was terribly affected by the smell. And I was just, well, that's kind of fun. I don't know what you guys are talking about. And she said, I went home, told this to my parents, and my parents were just, wait a second, like there seems to be something that doesn't work right here. And given they had the means, they had the knowledge, they knew where to go, and this was actually solved in a couple of years. Like she was first misdiagnosed with a genetic disease, and then she learned that she's congenital anosmic. She never smelled. And she was a very fortunate person. Like many other people that lose their sense of smell at birth or later on, they took years before they get diagnosed, because if they go to their primary care provider, they just don't know what to do with a lack of smell. Many doctors.
Is someone like that who is born with it or right after birth loses their sense of smell, are they more likely to have better outcomes in terms of adapting to it, because that person that you just shared spent 10 plus years or something navigating the world without their sense of smell and basically making workarounds for it. So have you seen anything with someone like that compared to someone that maybe lost it recently due to long COVID or something along those lines?
So definitely what we can say is that those that acquire smell loss, and suddenly in particular, they tend to have lower quality of life during the loss, and especially if the loss is persistent. Of course, this is a little bit mitigated in congenital anosmics because, as you said, like they don't really have a comparison. They do not know what they lost. But honestly, we don't have a ton of data out there to make this comparison. Like congenital anosmia is quite a rare disease. But definitely there is a link between quality of life, reduction of quality of life, and loss of sense of smell. And this, know that from animal models, so that the not having the olfactory bulb is linked to depression in the animal models. And so you could argue like a congenital anosmic doesn't really know whether their mood is impacted and how it would be different, whether their olfactory bulbs would be there. But I definitely had conversations like this with congenital anosmics, like is my mood sucks.
a lot of times people don't understand the role that smell actually plays, like why it might lead to depression and quality of life issues. And a lot of it is because smell isn't just smelling things around you, but a huge part of taste is actually smell. Can you explain a little bit about how that works?
Yes, and we should use the coffee analogy.
Oh, yeah.
Honor to your deep interest. But yeah, so I think the smell is different from taste, although when we talk about smell and taste, we tend to use the same words. And this is kind of a problem because then people in their mind, they're not aware of what is smell and what is taste. Hence, we need to do extensive research and push people to think about the differences between these senses. But what smell is whatever volatile are reaching the nose, either through the nose itself or when we're chewing food retronasally from the mouth. And so if we pinch our nose, however, whatever stays of the sensation that comes from the food that we have in our mouth, it's not smell anymore, and that is more taste. So when we have a cold, that is a very easy way to experimentally differentiate between smell and taste for ourselves. Like the food tastes bland, we only have broad strokes of this is sweet, this is salty, this is acidic, but we don't really get to the nuances of sweet like what? Sweet like a peach, sweet like a strawberry. That is like those nuances are given by the sense of smell. And so what people during COVID in particular, that I think it's the most striking event, like we're sniffing their coffee in the morning and drinking their coffee. And from one sip to the other, like everything disappeared. And they were just like, what happened? I cannot smell anything. I feel like that this is warm. So there is another sense that conveys temperature through the nose and receptors in the mouth. So this thing is warm, but it doesn't smell like coffee anymore. It doesn't taste like bitter anymore. And so that's why people started to tell researchers and clinicians, hey, something's wrong. Like I remember beginning of March 2020 when, my Twitter and my email got flooded with requests of what's going on. I have COVID and my coffee doesn't smell and really doctors at that point in time were not able to provide a response. And it took weeks to months to actually get smell and taste loss as one of the cardinal symptoms of COVID-19. So I want people through the research that we're doing with Jonas, as well as through the other project, to really know that we need to pay attention to the sense of smell and prepare healthcare provider to receive all of this like huge population right now that presents itself with smell and taste disorders.
So maybe you can talk a little bit about first, we did this survey, which was looking at the value of your senses, like how much you value your senses, the senses being taste, touch, smell, sight, hearing, and really diving into what people perceive as being important among those senses. And this is a study that was done before, right? We've had Martha and Rachel Hertz actually speak with us on the podcast before, but we were really diving into sort of replicating their study, but on a global scale, because as you were saying, there are these global differences, and understanding that better can help us understand better, the perceptions that people have. So Jonas, maybe you can tell us about the impetus for doing this study. Like, what were we looking for?
Yeah, so it's very much in the in exactly what Valentina just talked about, that we wanted to figure out how much do people actually value their senses, and how do the different senses, or how much do people value the senses differently? So do people think that vision and smell is equally important or equally valuable to them, or might there be a difference? And further, it was also to figure out, do people actually how much, not compared to other senses, but compared to other things, how much do people actually value their senses? So besides comparing the senses to each other, we also compared the senses to what we termed commodities. I'm not sure that's a great word for it, but it's it could be your cell phone, or it could be your pet, or it could be your left little toe.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's how the study went. HCD was able to, host the survey and help you guys launch it globally, to measure people around the globe. And they were presented with questions like that: which is more important, your taste or your sight, or what's more important, your sense of smell or a month's worth of salary, right? Or maybe it was 2 months worth of salary. Or, then it started getting really serious, right? Questions that were like, okay, what's more important, your vision, being able to see, or having your pet, right? Maybe more seriously, losing your left toe. And that one was taken very specifically from Rachel and Martha's original work, and she had gotten that from something that was written. So it didn't come out of nowhere, and it seemed quite shocking, I think, to people when they saw that question come up. But we looking for something that was part of your body, but not like an arm, right? But definitely losing a small body part.
I would even add here, hearing about the different types of trade-offs that were used in this survey, I feel like that would really highlight the differences in where you are globally, because certain things that you need, for example, maybe, I believe one of the things that you said was like, which do you prefer, like a month's salary versus your sense of smell? That is going to be very dependent on your socioeconomic status and features like that. So did you see those differences really get pulled out from your initial surveys?
We did see differences between countries, and we also saw these differences where some countries valued senses or valued things differently, but we didn't find this. We actually expected it was very determined by the socioeconomic status, where you could see that that would lead to a pattern between the countries, but we actually didn't see that, and we actually. That might be a bit premature to talk about, but we that's what we are going to investigate next, to figure out a little bit more about these underlying dimensions.
What were some of the biggest differences? I guess first, do people value their sense of smell?
So there's two things in this. So if we take the senses between each other first, then not based on what Valentina just have been talking about, it was maybe not that surprising that the sense of smell was the least valued sense, and vision was the most valued. And we actually, when we asked directly about the senses, we saw this hierarchy where smell was least, then taste, then hearing, and then most valued was vision. But not surprisingly, we also saw differences in the valuation based on which commodity we then compared to. So, for example, people's hair, their toe, or their pet were valued higher than, for example, online shopping or social media. But what we further saw was that people actually use different strategies to answer this survey. So there's different groups, and more than half of people, they primarily chose sense over commodity almost every time, independent of both the sense and the commodity. And I don't think that's surprising. I would have done the same. I'm pretty happy about my senses, and would not trade them up for many things.
I was going to say that is actually weirdly comforting to know that everybody's on the same page.
It's not entirely materialistic, because it was like your cell phone, money, social media access, streaming videos, things like that. So it's not that we're entirely materialistic. We do see value in our abilities, which I would say are sensory abilities are
yeah.
like our superpowers, right?
The
Exactly.
majority of people were part of that group, but we do have other groups that do not value the senses as much. So it really depends on what we're talking about. The pet was really a difficult comparison. Like
Yeah.
many people wanted to give up one of their senses to keep their pet. And we could understand that. Fewer people were willing to give up their senses to keep their online streaming services, which is also like helpful to
Comforting.
know.
Yes. So, and then we did this globally, which is really the big change about this. And were there patterns that you saw globally?
I think so. I'll briefly mention a last group of people who actually valued their senses and commodity more or less equally. So not only didn't they differentiate between the senses, but they also didn't differentiate much between commodities and senses. So it was in that group, it was maybe 60-40 for senses over commodities. And what we then we looked into the differences. Some countries had more of one group of people or the other, and one of the most striking results based on the countries we found was this: that in Thailand the census was almost equally valued. So in Thailand we couldn't see any difference in basically in how people value the senses, both in looking at questions where they were asked which they would rather give up, so the direct comparison between the senses, and it was also the same looking at the commodities, that actually here people valued the senses equally.
Now, what really kind of struck me as well, looking at the data when we were trying to make sense of things and look for patterns, is that, you were just talking about Thailand. And I think a lot of times people try to collapse countries into areas of the world. And so saying like Asia, Africa, Europe, North America, these sort of sections, but there were amazingly striking differences among countries, for example, in Asia. So you can't really just classify them together, because Thailand versus Japan are quite different, as well as from China, correct?
Yeah.
It wasn't that simple to just explain it by proximity, right?
But I also find that really, I think that also speaks to the greater nuance of the complexity within olfaction and within smell, and how much, even from our perspective, context is really important. So I think the work that you're doing here it's important, and because it's so foundational to really getting an understanding of like, where can we go next with this? And I know you alluded to that a little bit, that you're going to dive into the socioeconomics. Where else are you planning to explore with this survey? What are next steps with it?
The next step, so we're trying to actually take a deep dive into these 3 groups of people that use different strategies. And so socioeconomic status is one question. Second question is trying to understand how much of the commodities people own, as well as much of the sensory loss that they're experiencing. Like what we know from people that have lost their sense of smell, for instance, is that they start to value their sense of smell immensely more than what they did before they lose it. And so we want to really control for people's baseline abilities with the senses. And then we want to look at life satisfaction. Like you could argue that there are people that have a more optimistic outlook in life and they feel very satisfied. And so, maybe commodities or senses, there's not much difference. Like they almost have a Buddhist approach of no attachment to anything that is out there. Or people never thought about it, which honestly, I think it's one of the most common reasons why people may not be able to answer some of these questions, because we may be the first ones asking them to think about this. And so we want to ask people whether they're aware of their sense of smell or of their other senses at the baseline, to see whether these are modulators or drivers of the choice of strategy that they use to pick their own hierarchy of the senses. But and as well as we're trying to look in a more anecdotal way, whether there are cultural practices that would prime people in a certain country to value one sense over the other.
Yeah.
We do know, for instance, in Southeast Asia, there are many religious practices or cultural practices that require the use of smell and talking about smell. And we cannot really say the same in many countries in the Western world. So is this one of the reasons why like people are just, more used to talking about olfaction and being aware about it, that will make this sense being more important?
I'm excited to see where this research goes, and every single point that you're looking into, I was like, oh, I can't wait to hear what you guys find out. Because
I'm very curious too at this point, like we're in the next preparation phase.
And I know we're working towards publication, and we're presenting this at ACEMS for those that are attending. So you will be able to see all of these results as they're coming out. So very exciting stuff. Now I know that there's also, wrapping up, we're getting towards the time here. So we're going to be playing a game, right, Kathryn? And I thought it'd be fun to have them answer at the same time. And we'll see like what differences there are. So this is the free association react attack game. And Kathryn's going to call out some words. And the idea is that you just say the first thing that comes to mind. There's going to be 10 words, so we'll go through it pretty quickly, but don't put too much stock in whatever it is that you said. We've had people say all sorts of random things. So don't filter yourself, just let it come out. All right, Kathryn, without further ado, go ahead.
Great, thank you. So first word, anosmia.
Sadness.
Health.
Okay, so health, and then what was that, Valentina?
Sadness.
Sadness. Okay, fragrance.
Joy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Coffee.
Coffee, yeah.
Social media.
What do I think about social media? That may be complicated.
Complicated is actually
complicated.
something you could say, yeah.
All right, so next word, candle.
Fragrance.
Natural language processing.
No.
Well-being.
No. Coffee.
Garlic.
Ooh.
Yeah.
That
Smell
Does
it.
that count as a word?
Yes.
Yeah.
It works.
Musky.
Terrible. Like, yeah.
Perfume.
Yeah.
Cookies.
Sweet.
My daughter. It's one of the English words that she pronounces.
Coffee.
Oh, passion.
And the last phrase I should say is, of course, left little toe.
Rachel Hurds. That is my best association with that.
Did you have one for left pinky toe or left little toe?
Survey would be my
Survey.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you were going to feel that way because you've been like so entrenched in the data and the numbers.
Yes.
Well, that was amazing. Thank you both so much for joining us today. If people have questions about this survey, if they wanted to take this survey, is there a place that they could find you, learn more about this research, learn more about yourself? Where can people find you?
Oh, they can find both of us on the Monell website, Valentina Parma for me and Jonas Junge for Jonas. And we'll be happy to answer any questions.
And I actually think that the survey itself is still hosted on the World Taste and Smell Day website. So you're welcome to Google World Taste and Smell Day Association, and you can find sort of the fun, non-academic version sort of to take there.
Yeah, we'll have everything linked below. And so if any of the listeners are interested, we'll be sure to have everybody's links as well as the surveys linked. But we just want to really thank you both for joining us. It's always great to have the researchers in with us and chatting about the research. So we just want to thank you for your time. And for everybody listening, until next time, thank you so much for tuning in.
And I've been waiting to say this the whole time. Smell you later.
It was a lot of fun. Thank you.
It was. Thank you.
Bye.
For more information or updates, follow HCD Research on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter at HCD Research Inc. and at HCD Neuroscience. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and be sure to rate, review, and follow us on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Thank you and stay tuned for more curious conversations.